My name is Diane. I'm 58 years old. I live in Columbus, Ohio, and for the better part of 3 decades, I paid for a life that was never really mine. I'm not saying that to make you feel sorry for me. I'm saying it because I need you to understand what it felt like to be the one who always answered the phone, the one who always had something in the account, the one who said yes and yes and yes again until the words started sounding like a door that wouldn't close. The morning it finally ended, I was standing in a parking lot in January. My breath was visible in the cold air. I had just done one thing, one quiet, unremarkable thing, and it had rearranged everything. I'm going to tell you what that thing was. But first, I need to take you back, because you can't understand the ending until you've sat inside the middle for a while. I grew up in a house where money was never discussed at the table, but everyone understood its weight. My father worked at a tool and die plant in Dayton for 31 years. My mother kept the household accounts in a green ledger with a marbled cover, and she balanced it to the penny every Sunday night at the kitchen table while the rest of us watched whatever was on TV. I can still hear the sound of her pen scratching across that paper, slow, deliberate, precise. I didn't know it then, but I was being taught something. Not just about numbers, about responsibility. About the idea that if you were the one who kept things running, you were the one who mattered. By the time I was in my late 20s, I had a steady job as an office manager for a mid-sized civil engineering firm in Columbus. I liked the work. I liked knowing where everything was. I liked being the person people came to when they needed a form filed, or a vendor paid, or a meeting rescheduled. There is a particular satisfaction in competence, in being reliably good at something, and I had built my sense of self around that feeling. I lived alone in a one-bedroom apartment on the east side for 4 years before I met my husband, Gerald. He was tall, easy-talking, good at parties. I was none of those things, and that made him feel like an adventure. We married in 1994. I was 31. The early years were good in the ways early years tend to be, full of forward motion, full of plans. We bought a house in Westerville. I planted a vegetable garden in the back. I learned to make his mother's brisket recipe, which required 6 ingredients and 3 hours of patience, and I made it every year at Thanksgiving without being asked. I believed, with something close to religious conviction, that showing up consistently, quietly, without complaint, was how you built something that lasted. I believed that about marriage. I believed it about family. I believed it about money, too. What I didn't understand yet was that loyalty, offered without limit, doesn't build trust in the people around you. It builds appetite. Gerald's sister, Patrice, called about 14 months after the wedding. She needed $800. Her car had broken down, she had a new job lined up, but she couldn't get to work without a car, and could we just help her get it fixed? Gerald looked at me. I said yes. The $800 was paid from my personal savings account, not our joint account. That felt like the right thing to do. I didn't want Patrice to feel beholden to us both. Just to me, I suppose. As if that were a kindness. I was 32 years old, and I already had a habit I didn't have a name for. My parents had instilled in me something that I mistook for a virtue for a very long time. The conviction that a good woman keeps her family held together, even when the holding requires her to let go of pieces of herself. My mother had done it. Her mother had done it before her. I assumed it was simply the shape of love, something you chose again and again, the way you chose to drive carefully in the rain, not because it was easy, but because it was right. I was wrong. But I wouldn't know that for another 26 years. The requests didn't arrive all at once. That's the thing nobody tells you. If they had come in a flood, I would have seen them clearly. Instead, they came in drops, spread far enough apart that I had time to refill before the next one arrived. Gerald's brother, Terrence, lost his job in 2002 and needed 4 months of rent covered while he got back on his feet. Terrence had a quality that made money feel less real around him. He talked about his plans with such enthusiasm that the actual figures always seemed temporary, incidental, almost rude to bring up. I covered the rent. He was on his feet again by spring. I never brought it up. Neither did he. In 2005, Patrice's daughter, my niece Kyla, who was 16 and bright and full of potential that everyone agreed on needed braces. The orthodontist quoted $4,500. Patris called on a Tuesday night while I was cooking. I had the pasta water on, and I remember watching the steam curl off the pot while she explained the situation. Gerald was at the table behind me, and I didn't turn around. I just said, "We'll figure something out." I paid the bill on a Friday. I didn't tell Gerald how much it was. I want to be careful here because I don't want to make any of these people into villains. They were not villains. They were ordinary people with ordinary problems who had learned, somewhere along the way, that when they called me, the answer was yes. That is not the same thing as being evil. It is something quieter and harder to see. It is the slow education of someone who loves you into the specific shape of what you need. And I was an excellent student to be educated that way. I had been practicing it since my mother's green ledger. There was a year, 2008, during the recession, when my own paycheck was reduced by 12%, and I didn't tell anyone in the family. Gerald knew, of course, because he could see the accounts, but he didn't bring it up either. We just quietly adjusted. We stopped going out for dinner. I started buying the store-brand coffee. We skipped the vacation we'd been planning for 2 years. Meanwhile, Terrence needed help with a car payment, and I paid it, and I went without something I cannot now remember because I've spent so many years not remembering the things I went without. What I didn't know yet, what I couldn't have known, was that what I was building wasn't a family safety net. I was building a dependency, and the weight of it was going to increase in ways I wasn't tracking. The skipped appointment was a mammogram in 2010. I'd had it scheduled for 3 weeks, and then Kyla needed help with a college application fee and some other administrative cost for a scholarship program she'd applied to, and Patris called, and there was a tone in her voice, not demanding, just worn, and I rescheduled the appointment and forgot to reschedule it again. I went the following year instead. Everything was fine. I don't tell you that as relief. I tell you that as evidence of how casually I had started trading my own life for pieces of other people's. There was a moment, late in 2011, when I sat in the parking lot of the grocery store and did the math on a receipt and a phone bill and a bank statement all at the same time. I had 3 different pieces of paper on the steering wheel. The number that resulted, the number of dollars that had left my personal account in the previous 18 months, not the joint account but mine, was a number I put face down on the seat and drove home without discussing with anyone, including myself. I told myself it was enough. I was lying. The thing that changes first is never the big thing. It's always something small. A look that lingers a half-second too long. A question asked in a tone that doesn't match the question itself. Gerald's mother, Evelyn, moved in with us in 2015. She was 74 and had some mobility issues and genuinely needed help, and I want to be honest about that. I did not resent Evelyn. I liked her, actually. She was sharp and she kept her opinions to herself, and she watched game shows every evening and laughed at things I'd forgotten were funny. But her arrival changed the household in ways that took me a while to locate. Gerald started making more decisions without consulting me. Not large decisions, nothing you could point to, small ones, which contractor to call for the bathroom, what internet plan to switch to, which family gathering we were attending and which we were skipping. Each individual choice was reasonable. Together, they were a map of something I didn't want to read, something in me knew. I just wasn't ready to name it yet. There was a phone left face down on the kitchen counter one Thursday in April. It stayed there all through dinner. Gerald reached for it twice and put it back down. He didn't look at me when he did it. He looked at the table. Evelyn talked about a documentary she'd seen. I ate my food and watched the steam rising off the rice and said nothing. Later that night, I looked at our joint account online. There was a withdrawal of $400 in cash that I hadn't made and hadn't been told about. I closed the laptop. I went to bed. I didn't ask about it the next morning. That silence was something I had trained myself into over years. But the silence felt different now. Thicker. Like something had shifted its weight in a direction I couldn't name. Kyla had graduated from college by then. She had a job. She had an apartment. She was doing well by every reasonable measure, and I was genuinely proud of her. I want to say that clearly. But Patris had started calling more frequently again, and the calls had a new quality to them, a kind of restlessness I hadn't heard before. "You always come through, Diane," she said to me in one of those calls. She meant it as a compliment. I heard it as a verdict. I was working late on a Tuesday in November that year, finishing up some end-of-fiscal-year filings, alone in the office with the overhead lights doing their thin, fluorescent work. I thought about the green ledger my mother used to keep. I thought about all the numbers I had never written down, the ones that left and didn't come back. I thought about how the numbers you refuse to write down are still real. They just belong to you in a different way. They belong to you the way silence belongs to a room that should have had music. Outside, the parking lot was empty. A streetlight had gone out at the far end, and there was a section of asphalt in near darkness, and I looked at it for a long moment before I locked up and left. I found out on a Wednesday in March. It was Gerald's home office, the small room off the back hallway that used to be a guest room before Evelyn took it. He'd been using it for years, and I'd had no reason to go in there regularly. But the Wi-Fi router was in there, and it had gone out, and he was at the grocery store, and I went in to reset it. The desk was cluttered in the way of a man who worked in organized chaos stacks that looked random, but had some internal logic I'd never asked about. I reset the router. I was turning to leave. There was a manila folder near the edge of the desk, open, with a printout partially visible. I saw my name. Not in the way your name appears on a card or an envelope. It was a column header on a spreadsheet. My name, and next to it, a running total. I picked it up. It took me about 4 minutes to read it. The folder was not thick. It didn't need to be. Gerald had been keeping a record, not out of guilt or accountability, but as a planning document. It was a list of amounts, dates, and names. Patris, Terrence, Kyla, 3 other names I recognized as Gerald's cousins from his father's side. Amounts ranging from a few $100s to one that was over $6,000. The total at the bottom of the last column was $63,420. That was the number from my personal accounts, just mine. There were notes in Gerald's handwriting in the margins. One read, "Renewal likely next year." Another said, "Ask after the holidays." The language was not the language of a husband discussing family. It was the language of a man managing a resource. I set the folder back exactly where I found it. I walked to the kitchen. There was a glass of water I had left on the counter that morning. I drank it. I stood there for a while looking at the window above the sink, the one that faced the yard where my vegetable garden used to be before we relaid the patio 3 summers ago. The soil had been turned over and paved. I had let that happen without much argument because it seemed like a small concession at the time. When Gerald came home, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea I hadn't touched. He set the grocery bags down. He looked at me. Something in my face told him something because he didn't say hello. He stood very still. "I need to ask you something," I said. "Okay," he said. "The folder in your office, the spreadsheet with my name on it." He was quiet for a moment. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed outside. "That's just I keep track of things," he said. "You know how I am." "What does renewal likely next year mean, Gerald?" He looked at the bags on the counter. He did not look at me. "It means I thought you'd probably help again," he said. "You always do." The light above the table was on. It had a slight flicker I'd been meaning to have someone look at for months. I noticed it right then, for the first time, as something worth finally turning off. I drove to the park off Westerville Road that evening. The one with the small man-made pond and the walking path that nobody uses in winter. I parked. I turned the engine off. My hands were not shaking. That surprised me. I'd expected shaking. What I had instead was a very specific weight in my chest. Not pain, exactly. More like the feeling of a door you've been leaning against suddenly not being there. The sudden awareness of all the pressure you'd been exerting, the forward lean you didn't know you were making, the effort you had normalized completely. I sat there until the windows fogged. There was a crust of old snow along the edge of the parking lot. A duck moved slowly along the near bank of the pond, and then stopped and was still. There was nothing to interpret in that. I was just watching it because it was there, and it was alive, and it was doing something quiet with its time. I had not eaten dinner. I was not hungry. At some point, my phone buzzed. Gerald. I watched the screen until it went dark. I thought about $63,420. Not as an abstraction. As years. I did the math in my head, cautiously, the way you do when you already know the answer and aren't sure you want to confirm it. That number was 11 years of vacations. That number was a paid-off car. That number was the deck renovation I'd asked about twice and been told was not the right time. That number was a thing I had wanted to study, a program at Columbus State I'd looked at online and closed the browser tab on because we were tight right now. We had never been tight. I had been loose. There is a sentence that arrives sometimes not with noise, but with the stillness of something already known. I was the only one who didn't know. I didn't cry. I just sat there until the cold began to come through the doors, and then I started the car and went home. The clarity didn't come that night or the next morning. It came 4 days later on a Sunday, while I was doing something completely unremarkable. I was folding laundry. The bedroom was quiet. Evelyn was watching her game shows. Gerald was somewhere in the house, and I could hear him, his footsteps, a cabinet opening and closing, the way you can hear a person you've become very practiced at tracking even when you're not looking at them. I was folding one of his shirts, and I stopped. Not dramatically. I didn't drop it. I just stood there holding it and understood, with a totality that surprised me, that I had been organizing my life around a person who had been quietly organizing me. The clarity was not angry. That's the part I couldn't have predicted. It was completely still. I thought about the year I had a bad flu, a real flu, the kind that keeps you horizontal for 5 days, not just uncomfortable but genuinely disoriented, running a fever that went up to 103 at one point. I had been living alone in a studio apartment in Dayton before the marriage, before Columbus, 28 years old and sick in a way that felt slightly dangerous. I called nobody. Not because I had no one to call, I had friends, I had my parents, but because I had a deep conviction that being difficult was worse than being fine. I went to the urgent care clinic alone, I drove myself home, I filled my own prescription, I ate crackers in bed and watched bad television for 4 days and I got through it. Nobody came. I didn't ask anyone to, I managed. That memory, lying in a small apartment with a fever and no one coming, had always felt like a sad story to me, a story about aloneness. Standing there with Gerald's shirt, it felt like something else entirely. It felt like evidence. Evidence that I had already survived by myself, quietly, without drama, without a plan, and come out the other side intact. I set the shirt down on the bed, unfolded. I went to the small desk in the corner of the bedroom, where I kept a notepad I used for grocery lists and phone numbers. I picked up a pen. I wrote 4 words. I will not say what they were mine, and they were not poetic, and they were not a motto. They were just 4 words that told me exactly what I was going to do next. I tore the sheet off. I put it in my coat pocket. I finished folding the laundry. I took a Tuesday afternoon off work in April and drove to a branch of a credit union I had driven past 100 times without stopping. I had done my research. Not quickly, carefully, over 3 weeks, in small increments, on my phone during lunch breaks and early in the morning before anyone else was awake. I knew what I needed. I knew what I was doing. The woman at the credit union was named Doris, and she had reading glasses on a beaded chain and an entirely professional manner that required no explanation from me. I opened a new checking account and a new savings account. I gave them my work address for correspondence. I set up direct deposit for 50% of my paycheck. I noted the account numbers in a small red notebook I had bought at a drugstore and kept in my car. Nobody in the house knew this had happened. I want to tell you what that felt like. Not the money, the knowing. The having done something that belonged only to me. I had forgotten, completely and without realizing it, what it felt like to take an action that no one else had input into. No discussion, no consensus, no quiet reading of another person's expression to gauge whether I was going too far. I just did it. And then I went back to work. On a Thursday in May, I made a phone call from my car during my lunch hour. It was to a family law attorney named Patricia Webb, whose name I had written in the back of the red notebook after reading her reviews and her firm's website one evening when Gerald was watching television. The consultation was 45 minutes. She was straightforward. She told me what I needed to know. I wrote down the things she said, and I did not ask her to slow down. There was a list I wrote on a Saturday morning at the kitchen table while Evelyn was at her doctor's appointment, and Gerald was mowing the front lawn. I could see him through the window. He had his headphones on. He was doing the section near the oak tree, moving in straight lines, precise and unhurried. The list had 7 items on it. I'm not going to tell why. Oh, what they were, because they were practical and specific, and they belonged to the woman I was becoming, not the one I was explaining to anyone else. I folded it in half and put it in the red notebook, next to the account numbers. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. The difference between those two things is enormous. Anger is still a relationship with the thing that hurt you. Being done is not. Being done is simply the quiet act of turning your attention toward what's next. Gerald came in from mowing and poured himself a glass of water at the sink. He asked if I wanted anything. I said no, thank you. He didn't notice anything different. That was the last thing he would not notice. It was a Saturday morning in late June. 9:45. The kind of June morning where the light comes in flat and clean and everything looks exactly like it is. Evelyn had gone to her sister's for the weekend. I had known this for 2 weeks, and I had chosen this morning deliberately, without announcing the choice to anyone. Gerald was in the kitchen when I came downstairs. He was reading the sports section of the paper, which he still got in print because he'd been getting it in print since 1987 and saw no reason to change. He had coffee. The kitchen smelled like it, dark roast, slightly over-extracted, the same coffee I'd been buying for us for years. I sat down across from him. He looked up. He smiled the smile of a man with no particular information. I need to talk with you, I said. Okay, he said. He folded the paper, which I appreciated. He was present, which made what came next easier to say clearly. I want a divorce, I said. I've already spoken to an attorney. I have paperwork started. I'd like us to handle this without it becoming expensive or unkind. He looked at the table, then at me, then at the table again. Diane. I'm not asking you to agree with me right now, I said. I'm telling you where I am. I've thought about this for a long time. What about the house, he said. Not a question really, just words finding the air. The attorney will walk through all of that. I've got the name of one she recommends for you, if you'd like it. He put his hand flat on the table. His wedding ring caught the light. It was a small, unremarkable gesture, not threatening, not pleading. Just a man putting his hand on the table because he didn't know what else to do with it. I didn't think you'd actually, he stopped. I know, I said. That was the whole conversation. Not because there wasn't more to say, there was years more to say, but because I had already said everything that needed to be said inside myself, and I did not need to perform it for an audience. I got up. I took my coffee to the back porch. The yard was summer green, the oak tree making its broad shadow across the grass. A cardinal was moving through the lower branches, in and out of the shade, bright red and then gone, bright red and then gone. I heard Gerald's chair scrape back from the table. I heard him walk down the hallway toward his office. I heard a door close. Not the slamming kind, the quiet kind, the kind that means a person has gone somewhere to be alone with something they weren't expecting. I sat with my coffee until it went cold. The first 3 weeks, I woke up at 4 in the morning almost every day. Not from nightmares, not from crying, just from the particular alertness of a nervous system that had been on a specific kind of duty for 26 years and didn't know yet that the duty had changed. I'd lie there in the dark, we were still in the house, still navigating the practicalities, Gerald sleeping in the guest room, and I would listen to the silence of a house at 4 in the morning and try to locate what I was feeling. It wasn't sadness exactly. It was something lighter and stranger and less comfortable than sadness. Sadness, at least, has a texture you can press against. This was more like standing in a room you've just emptied of furniture. You can see the walls clearly for the first time. You don't know yet what you want to put there. The space is accurate and it is temporarily without purpose, and it is, in that way, both better and harder than the clutter was. My appetite shifted. I had been a person who ate 3 deliberate meals a day, the same categories of food on something close to a rotation, because routine had always felt like competence. Now I ate when I was hungry, which was sometimes at odd hours, and I found I was eating differently, lighter, slower, with a kind of attention I hadn't paid to the experience in years. Loretta called in the second week. Loretta had been my closest friend before the marriage, and we had drifted in the way friends drift when one of them builds a life around a family that takes up all available space. She called because mutual acquaintances had told her something was happening, and she called the way she had always called, directly, without preamble, just her voice saying my name. As if no time had passed at all. We talked for an hour and 20 minutes. I sat on the back porch steps in the evening heat, and I told her things in the order they occurred to me rather than in the order that would make the best sense to someone else. She listened without interrupting, which was something I had forgotten was possible. At the end she said, "I should have called more." I said, "I should have picked up more." Both things were true. Freedom doesn't always feel like freedom at first. Sometimes it just feels like silence. But silence, I was learning, is not the same thing as emptiness. Silence is what's there when you stop filling every available space with noise that isn't yours. Patris called once during this period. I let it go to voicemail. I listened to the message, which was brief and slightly confused in its tone. She wasn't sure what she'd heard, she just wanted to check in, no urgency, call when I could. I did not call back, not out of anger. Out of a simple recognition that I had nothing left to offer and no obligation to manufacture it. In October, I started a new job. Not because I needed to leave my old one. I didn't, technically. But there was a position at a healthcare nonprofit on the north side that a colleague had mentioned in passing, and I had applied in August almost on instinct, and they had offered it to me, and I took it. The office was smaller. The salary was comparable. The work was different in a way I hadn't anticipated, less about maintaining systems and more about building them from scratch, which required a kind of daily improvisation I hadn't exercised in years. I found that I was good at it. Better, maybe, than I had expected, because improvisation and stability are not opposites. They're different applications of the same underlying skill, and I had 26 years of that skill stored up and nowhere to put it until now. I started walking in the mornings before work. Not for any particular reason, not fitness, not productivity, not because a podcast told me to. Just because the October air was cool and clean, and the neighborhood I'd moved to after the house sold had streets I didn't know yet, and something about not knowing them felt, for once, like a gift instead of a loss. There was a woman named Cheryl who worked in my new office, in the grants department. She was 44, sharp, a little guarded in the way of someone who had been burned before and knew it. We had lunch 3 times before she mentioned, almost incidentally, that her marriage had ended the previous year. She said it the way people say things they've gotten used to, flatly, accurately, without editorial. I told her what had happened to me. Not all of it, just the shape of it. The years of being the one who covered things, the folder on the desk, the account I opened at the credit union. She put down her fork. You opened it at a credit union, she said. On Morse Road, I said. She laughed, not at me, at the specificity of it. That's exactly right, she said. That is exactly the right move. I don't know why that sentence hit me the way it did. I had done the thing alone. I had known it was the right thing when I did it. But there is something about having another person confirm it, not for validation, but for the simple human pleasure of being recognized, that lands differently than the solitary knowledge. We finished lunch, we walked back to the office, she held the door. That was all. But it was new, and it was mine. I am 58 years old and I understand things now that I didn't at 31, and that I couldn't have understood even if someone had tried to explain them to me, because understanding of this particular kind doesn't come from information. It comes from time, and from the patient, somewhat humbling accumulation of consequences. I understand that being someone people rely on is not the same as being someone who matters. That the need people have for you and the love people have for you are not the same currency, even when they arrive wearing the same face. I understand that the green ledger my mother kept on Sunday nights, that precise, careful accounting, was not just about money. It was about knowing what was real, knowing what had come in and what had gone out and what was left. My mother understood something my daughter's generation is only beginning to articulate, that you cannot give from a register you refuse to read. I drove past the credit union on Morse Road recently. I didn't stop. I wasn't going there. I was just going somewhere else and it was on the way. But I saw it, with its small sign and its modest parking lot, and I thought about the afternoon I walked through that door with nothing but a decision and my work address written on a piece of paper. That is the version of myself I want to remember, not the woman who finally left. The woman who, before leaving, went quietly and alone and in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday and took the first T-step that was hers and hers only. There are people watching this who know exactly what it feels like to be the account everyone draws from, who have done the math on a receipt in a parking lot and then turned the paper face down, who have said yes so many times that yes stopped sounding like a choice and started sounding like a name. I want you to know this. The Tuesday afternoon version of you is available. The one who drives somewhere unremarkable, parks the car, walks in, and does the one quiet thing that changes everything. You don't have to announce it. You don't have to make a speech. You just have to do it. And then you go back to work, and the day continues, and nothing looks different from the outside and everything is.